All right, I'm joined now by Brent, the head risk manager down at DSI Sportsbook, and what I presume, as I talked about last week, is probably very sunny Costa Rica. Brent, how's it going today, man?
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, we talked about before, even during quote unquote rainy season or green season here, you still have sun most times in the day, which is the case here, and then in the afternoon it clouds over, then we get some rain, sometimes torrential rain, but you can almost sure as God made green apples, to wake up the next day it's gonna be sunny again. So look forward to that every day and a nice sunny morning.
Well, I got to say, I just got back from Vegas a couple days ago, and it was a very hot and dry 110 degrees out there. I imagine the humidity is the biggest issue in Costa Rica.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about Vegas. I just love that place, and people always they say, oh, took a vacation. Where'd you go? And I go to Vegas, and people are like, you work in the gambling industry, and you take and you live in a hot, sunny place, and you take a vacation. You go to a hot, sunny place where there's gambling. I guess I'm a type.
Yeah, I guess that's called a degenerate. That's what we call them here in the industry. So are you a craps guy? Are you a blackjack guy? What are you?
I mean, I know I have a negative EV, a negative, expected value when I play a game like roulette. The numbers are just obviously, I think it's one of the highest games in terms of the casino hold percentage against me. But I just like it, and it's funny because I shouldn't play it based on the math and stuff like that. But the one thing I do that many people don't do is when I get up, I walk away. I'm ahead, I walk away. And I do that consistently. And it happened last time I was there. I was there this year as well. I sat down, first number I played came up. I played, okay, so I thought, okay, I'm going to play the second number because I got kind of a number in mind. Played the second number, it came up as well. So I had two spins of the wheel, basically, more than double my money, obviously, and walked away. And I was like, damn, I was planning on playing for a while.
Well, you know what? Maybe you just have a fetish for numbers. Maybe that's why you gravitate to roulette. I don't know. There's got to be some kind of name for a fetish for numbers. I don't know. Maybe one of our listeners knows it out there.
Fetish for numbers.
Can reach
let's
out
not go
to
down
us.
that road.
Yeah, right. All right, let's not. So, you and I were talking before we started recording here that watching the board light up. I mean, it excites me every day. It doesn't matter if it's week 1, if it's week 8, week 15. I don't care. It's just exciting to see the market moving, seeing those numbers going up, going down, all that type of thing. Do you just fall right back into rhythm with the start of a new season?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the thing is, we obviously have our handful of sharp bettors in house, but there's a lot of guys who are out there in the market who don't bet specifically here. So like you'll see movement on some games, and you think, wow, who bet that and where do they bet that, and you kind of like, oh, I wonder who that was. And sometimes you can get a feel based on what book moves first, how sharp the guy was, and you can also kind of watch things and see how quickly a number gets bet back or if it runs away on one side, because you get that a lot of push and pull in a lot of games, and there's always a number where if you go low enough on one side, a sharp guy is going to bet it, and there's always a number on the other side. If you go high enough, a sharp guy is going to bet it. I mean, I've talked about this before. If you ask a sharp guy and say, hey, who do you like in this game, he'll say, well, what's the price? What's the number? Then I'll tell you who I like. I mean, if I got to lay 2.5, well, I like team A. If I'm taking plus 6.5, well, I like team B.
All right, so once again, for our listeners here, as we go throughout these segments with Brent over the course of the college football and the NFL seasons, and we typically do this all the way up until the Super Bowl, so we get a chance to talk about props and all that type of stuff. Sort your odds screen by rotation number if you're following along, because that's how we're going to be going through these games. And this is one that we talked about with some sharp action last week, but you mentioned that push and pull, and I think this game is really interesting for that. Game 149-150, Wisconsin and South Florida on Friday night. Again, we mentioned this game last week with some sharp action on the Badgers.
Yeah, the sharp money I got initially on Wisconsin was at -10. I think the lowest opening number, out there at all was 9.5. And that one, I believe, when we talked about it last week, the number had gotten up to 13.5. And we actually, you had asked me about, if you've got money one way, my bet count is almost about 2 to 1 favoring Wisconsin as well. I mean, you asked the question is, why sit at 13.5 if everyone's 13.5? Why not go to 14 and see if kind of fishing for some money back? And we talked about how, it was early, and I mentioned that you kind of want to sit back and see how the market adjusts. I mean, is someone out there waiting for a 14 to pop and then they grab it, or they're waiting for a limit to go higher and then they're grab the other side, or it's just kind of found its way and it's 13.5 was the right number, and you kind of hope to balance that and almost right off the -10 and hope a game like that doesn't land. This one here we're talking about South Florida, we're all the way down to 10.5 as well on this one. So this one went from an opener here at 10 where I got bet by sharp money up to 13.5 and now back to 10.5. Now I didn't take a sharp bet here on the other side on South Florida, but obviously somewhere in the market, it did happen. You've got every big book in the world pretty much is out there at 10.5 now.
So obviously for you as a risk manager, I mean, this is really where your part of the job comes in. You get sharp money on Wisconsin, so your books are imbalanced. Somebody else got sharp money on South Florida, 13 or 13.5. You've got to go with the market so that you're not exposed for that sharp better to find another 13. But at the same time, it limits your ability to get South Florida money back. So how do you handle that situation where you've got to go with the market, but you're still imbalanced?
Yeah, you kind of take a stand sometimes. And again, opening week is always, kind of, I guess, fortunate that when you get bet early enough, you've got lower limits. So your risk in terms of a dollar value may not be as high. Your risk in terms of line movement is probably higher than it will be later on in the season, just because as the season goes on, ideally our numbers get sharper as we move along. So there is that kind of that you throw into it. And again, like I said, you asked me, just kind of an experience thing as well. You asked me about why not being at 14 on Wisconsin and get that money back. And that's the whole reason why. Like, if a situation like this is really a good example, and I'm glad you mentioned that, just because you can kind of go with the market and see when it's going to come back. And if the market starts going down, like say when everyone was 11.5 on Wisconsin, I had got bet at Wisconsin at 10 and 12. If I wanted to hang, say, a half point higher or even a whole point higher at numbers like 11 and 12, maybe not a big deal. I can at least be more attractive to someone who wants to grab back that South Florida. Saying if everyone in the market is 11 and I'm giving 12, someone's going to say, okay, if you're going to give me 12 instead of 11, I may as well take it. So it's kind of just, you just kind of get a feel for things, and this situation actually worked out perfectly, and that the money did come back the other way, and our risk really, our only risk is landing on 10 and paying one side instead of the money canceling out on both sides. So this one worked out for us. Obviously it doesn't work out that way all the time. Sometimes you hold on to a number and maybe the whole market did move to 14 and 14.5 and you kind of think, wow, I wish I could grab the bet back the other way at plus 14, but it's just kind of an experience thing and a feel for games.
Now, one game I do want to talk about that has some sharp action in the marketplace. It hasn't necessarily come in there with you at DSI, but game 153, 154, UMass and Rutgers. And this is one of those conversations that you and I have had before that, sharp bettors find value in their numbers, and they don't really care which team it is. The idea of Rutgers being bet up into a 16-point favorite against anybody is kind of astonishing, but that is the case here, and it illustrates some of the talking points we had last week.
Yeah, Rutgers and UMass, it's not one of those marquee games, and it's not like, a whole lot of public money is probably going to be bet on that game unless someone's sitting down and watching it. So that's a number that it looks like was driven up by sharp money and going from 10, it looks like the lowest opening number was 10. Obviously, fortunately, I didn't get bet on that price, but we're all the way up to 16. And if you're talking about an opening number going that high, it really is quite a substantial move. The only thing, as you're sitting on my side of the counter, you hope that kind of you take full point jumps at that point, going from 10 to 11 to 12, and to find your number where it's going to settle as quickly as possible. And you also do that with lower limits, and hopefully you don't get bet for max bets on numbers like 10. If you're taking a max bet at -10, you're ending up at 16, and there's sharp guys hitting you all the way up there, then you're really in a bad spot. If you take low limits at 10 and you move right away to 11 and you kind of find your 13-16 range quickly, you're in a much better spot. So it's just it's just kind of a feeling out process in terms of where a number is going to settle and trying to limit your risk in terms of taking smaller bets to get to that point.
Now let's illustrate that from our side. We've been talking about it from your side of the counter, and by our side I mean us, the listeners here, and myself. Game 157, 158, Purdue and Nevada. This number did touch 11.5. I missed it with traveling back home and all that yesterday. We're recording on Thursday night, so maybe it's back to 11.5 now. I don't know, but that's one where a number may have popped up, and somebody out there, and right now it's me, is sitting there going, I want to wait for an 11.5. I may not get one, So is there a way that you can kind of, as a bettor, see into the market and kind of figure out if you're going to get that desired number or not?
It is difficult for sure because you have to know what's driving certain prices. Now, the sharp guy, say on Purdue, who laid -7, might not be the sharp guy who laid Purdue minus 10 or whatever. It might be the public who got on that side and said, yeah, that's what drove it up. And we talked about before, we're not only moving on sharp money, we're moving on bets we take, regardless of who they're from. A case like that, like just hypothetically speaking, let's say sharp money came in on Purdue -7. And the public, kind of tailed with it, all the way up from 9.5 to 10. You're talking about a situation now where your bet count is probably 4-1 one side. You took sharp money on one, on Purdue on the favorite, and you got public money the same side. So it's like, how far is that number going to go? When you see if it pop up to like 11.5, on this side of the counter, we kind of have to find the point. Like I said, where a number is going to settle. What's it going to take for me to get money back the other way? And if a number like 10 or 11.5 popped up on Purdue and came back the other way, then you kind of found, okay, that's where it is. The Thursday game is a good example as well. We're talking the Cincinnati and UCLA game. We had sharp money on UCLA early at +3.5. Number dropped all the way down to 2. We got Cincinnati money and then kind of backed up to where we are at 2.5 right now. Now, if someone's sitting there saying, wow, I wish I could get, UCLA plus, at least 3, is that going to come? You really have to watch the markets and see where it's going, because generally speaking, the sharp guys are going to grab the, your key numbers as well. The Purdue example is one where you're talking about 11.5. And again, 11.5 obviously is not a key number, but every half point is worth something.
Yeah, that's very true. And so for our listeners out there, you want to look for that resistance point, where kind of the book gets to a number, starts to get that nibble back. That's the number that's probably not coming back for you. I mean, maybe this one does go to 11.5. It'll probably take some, decent investment to get there. But again, you look for that resistance point in the marketplace. Once a couple of these sports books get it, that's when as a bettor, you better grab that number and hope that you can get in there, or realize that maybe you do have to take a +11 here instead of an 11.5. And again, not that 11 is a number of significance really, as we just talked about, but especially when you're dealing with 2.5, 3, 3.5, 6, 6.5, 7, 7.5. That's where you really want to pay close attention, because those resistance points come a lot easier around those key numbers.
Yeah, and you talk about how 11.5 and 11 is probably not a big deal, and you are right. I mean, the difference between 10.5 and 11, and 11.5, it really isn't that much. But if you think about it in terms and again, I'm just kind of expressing this in a different way to think about things. If you think about that, a standard half point is worth 10 cents, and you're betting, say, $100 bet. Well, that's $10 for the first half, and that's $10 for the second half. So, if someone was going to, if you found $20 on the floor, would you pick it up and put it in your pocket? Probably. I mean, why wouldn't you, kind of thing, as long as no one was looking or anything like that. So that's what I say, like the difference between 10.5 and 11.5, if you're grabbing it. If you think about it that way, it starts making a little bit more sense.
All right, so as we move ahead to Saturday here, we had some Ohio State sharp action last week. They're still 27.5 out there in the market. Had some Nebraska activity on the over for their game against South Alabama, game 163, 164. Anything else on those two games? I mean, have the counts gotten a little bit more lopsided on the sharper sides?
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State is kind of settled there at 27.5. Last week when we did this call, the Nebraska total had been 65, and it's gone up to 66.5 now. So I've got more money on the over now. Since that time, I haven't taken another sharp bet. The only one came at over 64. That's South Alabama Nebraska game, but the public has gone the same way. So my wager count's almost like 3-1 on that total, which brings me to 66.5 where I am right now, and pretty much everyone in the market is there as well.
Now, here's something that just caught my eye here. Game 167, 168, Akron and Illinois. There was a prominent site out there. For the life of me, I can't remember who it is. I'm not just doing that because I don't want to direct traffic to one of our competitors. I can't remember where it came out, but there was a very big bet on Illinois out in Las Vegas. Is that something that you follow? Do you sort of keep an eye on, what happens with the brick and mortars, or are you just mostly focused on, the offshore market and what your competitors are doing.
Yeah, pretty much mostly focused on what our competitors are doing, mostly on the offshore market. I would say there's, the Westgate is probably the most, I guess, reputable casino, if you want to say, out there in terms of the Vegas guys who are, probably sharper, take higher limit bets and stuff like that. So they're probably one of the more aggressive ones out there. They're, other than the, the big chains, if you will, of casinos out in Vegas, I would say that's probably the one that you would pay attention to.
All right, so we move here to game 181, 182 as we get to talk about some new sharp action in the marketplace. South Carolina, North Carolina, neutral site game in Charlotte, and this is a substantial line move in this game.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I got bet here on South Carolina at -9.5. That's where I took sharp money. So sharp money on South Carolina -9.5. We're up to 11.5 right now. I do see like this one did open as low as 7.5 out there. And again, you're throwing these numbers out there. Again, the idea is that you're going to get as much money bet on both teams. You want as much bet on South Carolina as you do on North Carolina. So 7.5 seemed like the right number when this one was opened at whatever sportsbook opened that low. And again, it's kind of, it's not necessarily out there picking the winner and saying, okay, I think South Carolina is going to win this game by, 7 or 8 points. That's not what you're doing. You're saying, how much attention from the bettors are you going to get on both sides? And you're just looking for a number that's going to kind of split that up. Obviously 7.5 was way low. My sharp, in store, I got bet at 9.5. So that wasn't high enough. And 11.5 is where everyone is right now. I'm fortunate in that North Carolina is, more of a, I guess you want to say like a brand name school. It's not like they're an unheard of school or one that doesn't get much attention. So I do have, my count is fairly close. My money, because the sharp bet I took, is one-sided for South Carolina. Other than the 9.5, I really haven't got anything sharp bet back the other way, but it's just continued, to come back and forth on both sides. And again, I'm kind of fortunate in that case in that my only exposure is just kind of like part of the initial sharp bet, as I've got good two action since then.
All right, so let's take a look here at game 187, 188 in the ACC, Virginia Tech and Boston College. Interestingly enough here, there is some sharp money on the side. It's the total that you guys got some sharp money on, but the side has also been climbing here.
Yeah, and again, I didn't take, obviously you talk about how you manage things and where you go with the market. Well, everyone here on VTech is basically 4.5, or some places are holding a 4 with juice, not wanting to move off that number. It's an interesting game to look at just because this number I think the lowest number out in the market was a 2.5 on Virginia. Now, when you see books sitting at 4 right now and putting 4 -115 or whatever, those are the guys who probably opened that 2.5, maybe got bet heavy at 2.5, and you really don't want to go off 4 if you don't have to. If someone opened later and is open up, say 3 or 3.5, you might be more inclined to go to 4.5 to get money back the other way, so that your only risk is really a game landing 4. So where you open is really, really key in terms of how you manage the side. Myself, I did not get bet on VTech at -3 or 3.5. I didn't get sharp money on that one at all. I did get sharp money on the over though. That came at over 57. 58.5 is where I am right now. I think there's some 58s out there still. This one opened as low as 56.5, but I got bet by sharp money to over 57.
Now, maybe some interesting correlation here with the side in total. Is that something that you pay attention to when you see one side going up and also one part of the total going up? I mean, does that sort of catch your eye a little bit more?
Sometimes. I mean, it depends pretty much, on the spread and the total, where they're going. I mean, if you've got, a big favorite who's getting bet up and the numbers going up, say, Nebraska, South Alabama, for example, that line opened, I opened at 33.5, I think it was. I'm at 36 right now. So the money's going up on Nebraska. The total's open at 63.5, and we're up to 66.5 right now. So you've got kind of a spread and a total going the same way. There's more of a correlation that way, and you kind of get the wrong impression, if you will, that the sharp money on the over is the right money because the big favorite side is going up as well.
All right, one more game to touch on here with some sharp action on the college side. Georgia and Vanderbilt, game 201, 202. Sharp action is probably not going to surprise anybody regarding this game.
Yeah, I guess not. I mean, we're sitting at 22, which again is kind of like not a real relevant, not a significant number. But I did take sharp money here on Georgia. I've got a wager count also favoring Georgia of about 2-1. So again, not a crazy count one-sided. 2-1's not bad for me. we'll see, like, when big marquee teams get run away, you'll see counts up to, like, say 4-1, 5-1. I mean, 5-1 is a real substantial count, but it's kind of a typical count with a 2-1 one way. So I do have public money going with Georgia, which probably is no surprise. 20.5 is where I got bet, sitting at 22 right now. And again, this is one of those things where you just kind of sit there and see what the market does. Again, 22, if I went to 22.5, would I really have any exposure? Probably not. When you hit to 23, even, you're really not kind of at risk of going up that high when considering the fact that I opened at 20.5. Now, if this was a number that opened, like, say 17.5, you'd be more inclined to hold. So I wouldn't be surprised if this number went up.
All right, one more college game I want to talk about here. No sharp action to discuss, but this is something that can happen here in late August, in September, in October. Boise State and Florida State. We have a time change. We have a venue change. We also have this game reposted as game 299-300 on the rotation order. So sort of walk us through that process, Brent, of, when it's action, when it's not, what the house rules are. And also some of these games here in the non-conference may wind up with a running clock or may end up suspended because of weather. So how does that all factor in?
Yeah, I mean, the venue obviously has to be, you've got to be playing at the same venue. We've seen that, several times last year, I believe, as well. It happened, numerous times where the venue got changed due to hurricane season or whatever it was. And also there were times when games got moved from the day as well. So it's got to be played on the same day and at the same time. You talk about the same place and the same day. You talk about the duration of games. Again, we have actually in preseason we had a shortened game. The rule is 55 minutes of play for the game to have action. Second half, so obviously that applies as well. You've got to play the full second half. 55 minutes of play is for the game. In a case like that, your first half action would still have action, but just the game in the second half would be impacted if it didn't go the full 55 minutes.
Now, what about games that get canceled? From a season win total standpoint, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it really sucks when that happens. You figure, most teams, you try and make those up, but yeah, they all teams have to play their regular allotment of scheduled games. So that's kind of just like a basic rule, and I guess it kind of sucks sometimes for a guy who bets, say, over 6.5 and a team's already got, say, 7 wins, but they don't play their full complement. But I mean, it puts us in a bad position as well, because you can't just grade the over, you got to grade the under as well, and it's not fair to the guy who bet the over or the under.
All right, so let's transition over to the NFL side here, and we don't have any new sharp action to discuss for week 1. I'm sure we'll have plenty on next week's segment. But the big story in the NFL this week, obviously, Andrew Luck. The impact of him, what his impact is to the betting line. So how did you guys handle that situation at DSI?
Yeah, it's a real tough spot because, when you look at a situation like this, and it was really quite a surprise. I mean, there's not many like big events like that. I mean, you talk about things that can affect a regular season wins or the odds to win the championship or whatever. There's not a whole lot of things that are quite as big as this. Maybe someone like LeBron changing teams you could throw out there would be like, a big one. Actually, this NBA season, the off season, all the kind of pairings of superstars that went on, those really affected the markets. This is a case where a guy just kind of decided to hang him up, and it's not just it affects many other markets as well. You're talking about the games that are usually up in advance. You're talking about the odds to win the division, the conference, the Super Bowl. In a case like Luck, you're talking about his, who's going to be the leading passer in terms of yards for the season. So you want to adjust those. The MVP of the league as well. So you have to adjust those a little bit. And it's really, you kind of have to like just throw numbers out there and see where they're settled. I mean, the Colts, just for example, in the Super Bowl, they were around 12-1, I believe it was. And they were one of those teams where the public, quite liked and were betting on both for the division and the Super Bowl. So they went from about 12-1 to somewhere around 30-1. I think we got as high as 60-1 and came back down to where we are right now, around 40-1. So it's one of those things where you just kind of have to adjust, tweak, and just kind of, find the number that it's going to settle down at.
Now, also, too, I mean, you kind of have to factor into the equation as well that, Jacoby Brissett has been a full-time starter before. He's been getting the first-team reps. So, in terms of, say, an adjustment to the game spread for week 1, does Brissett having experience, having, the preseason reps matter? Or do you just sort of look at a number for Andrew Luck and say, well, he's worth this much, so that's what we're going to take off.
Yeah, that's the thing. You obviously have to. I mean, going back to like the baseball kind of thing with the wins over replacement that they use as a measure quite a bit. In a case like this with Brissett, yeah, he's a guy. And the thing with Brissett, it's not like he hasn't played games before, and he's played in the same system as well. When you're talking about the division here with the Colts, it's really interesting because it's not like there's really strong teams within that division. I mean, you go years and years back, and these teams were all kind of like between 6 wins, 7 wins, 8 wins, 9 wins. There wasn't a whole lot to choose between them. And the Texans, I mean, previously these are one of the teams I would kind of fade the most. And you talk about Luck, well, what's going on with Clowney as well. I mean, what's his value to the team? Now, the question if they trade Clowney away, and I think last we heard today was I think Philadelphia and Seattle were in the mix. Miami was in the mix a few days ago as well. So, I mean, how does that affect Houston? So, okay, yeah, Luck's gone, but we're going to compare Luck versus Clowney. And let's say they do make a trade, they do deal Clowney, and they get draft picks instead of an immediate impact person. Well, okay, the Texans are now a little bit weaker on defense as well. Jaguars, for example, they got a new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. Their offensive system is all new. In terms of depth, how good is Jacksonville? I mean, if they lose somebody, so Tennessee, their defense is probably one of the most overvalued in the NFL. They got a offensive coordinator who's we're going to find out. Their head coaching isn't that great, so maybe they're not as strong as well. I mean, so you got the Texans who are probably going to lose Clowney, and we're looking at one of those teams that sharp guys were probably going to fade this season. The Jaguars got a whole lot of changes going on. The Titans just seem to be overvalued and just not that great of a team. And the Colts, well, I mean, they've got one of the, probably the best offensive line in the division, if not the conference. They got depth. I don't know. I just don't think that the Colts are really that bad of a team, even without Luck. That's my opinion at least.
Well, so I guess that would be my follow-up question here is when you get a scenario like this, and obviously it's very rare. I mean, usually it's going to be a wide receiver tears an ACL or a running back tears an ACL, something like that. When you get a situation like this, what is that process like? I mean, you guys call like an emergency staff meeting and try to see what everybody thinks about it. Do you take the lead as the head risk manager? How does that whole dynamic play out?
Yeah, it's me initially, and the first thing you hope for is that you're in the office when something like this happens. I mean, if you're at home,
were you there?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. So that was kind of fortunate, but yeah, it's a matter of you just kind of have to sit back and wait at first. Take a deep breath and say, okay, what do we think the right number is? Let's look at what's going on in the marketplace as well, and just lower the limits and just kind of gradually work your way until something just basically settles. I talked about them in the Super Bowl. They basically went from 12 to 50 back to 40 where we are right now, and just kind of the number has to settle, and the market is who determines that. You take a look at if this happened in another division, like I said, I think the division that the Colts are in is one where, those other teams just don't make a whole lot of convincing arguments that they're that much better than the Colts, even without Luck. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out. But you take a look at a division like, say, the NFC East, Dallas, Philadelphia, Washington, New York. I think most people would agree that Washington and New York, into the Giants, just don't have a chance. Now, so you're talking about a 2-horse race, whereas in the Colts division right now, I think it's still a 4-horse race.
Now, I guess the last thing I'll ask here, because this kind of intrigues me, when you think back to the old days, sometimes bettors would get quote unquote inside information. They'd find things out before other people would. Other times the sports books would find things out before other people would. Did you have any inkling about this Luck thing before it happened? Did you find out at the same time all of us did with that Adam Shefter tweet?
Yeah. Everyone pretty much found out, I think, at the same time. The only one who I guess knew about it was the Colts themselves, because apparently they had been working on this deal about a week before the settlement that they came with. So it was like, the Colts had at least a week beforehand where they knew about it. But, the rest of us were kind of, I guess you want to say, blindsided by it all as well.
Well, I mean, at least the nice thing is with somebody like Shefter, it's probably legit. I mean, obviously there's parody accounts and stuff like that out there, but, with it being Shefter, it's something where you do have to react pretty quickly. And Like you said, fortunately you were in the office. I mean, if you're not in the office, is it like, a doctor on call, or you just, speeding down to the office, or what?
Yeah, no, honestly, if it, what would happen initially is our night people would just take the whole thing off the board and kind of just wait until morning, perhaps, to wake me up or whatever it was the case like that. But yeah, it's, you have to kind of play defense first. You don't want to be aggressive in terms of hanging a number that's not valid anymore.
All right, last thing here on the NFL then. These lines have also been up for a long time, much like college football. When do you anticipate seeing some movement for the Week 1 NFL market?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see that probably until, say Thursday, Wednesday of next week or whatever. If you look at these numbers, and again, there just hasn't been a whole lot of movement. I mean, Atlanta, Minnesota, just going the first number on the board. Open at 4.5. Minnesota is sitting at 4 right now. They opened 47.5. It's still 47.5. Pop down to Washington, Philadelphia. That opened 8. It's sitting at 8.5 right now. Totals moved a half a point. There's just not a whole lot of movement at all. I mean, one of the the biggest moving games, if you will, would be the Detroit game that we talked about as sharp, where sharp money was on Detroit -1. It's up to 2.5 right now. We talked about last week, actually, with the San Francisco total of sharp money came in on that at over 49. Last week we talked about it, and it was only the total had gone to 49.5. This week, it's gone to 50. So, right now we're sitting at 50 on that one. So it's kind of like just a gradual move on that one. Baltimore is one of those teams that has moved more so. They did open, I think it was 3.5. That number is pretty much 5 everywhere. That's one of those games where I just kind of get a sneaky suspicion that sharp money might be coming back on Miami. We talked about before how it's kind of like almost going fishing sometimes. You're just waiting for a number to pop up. I think if someone popped up a 6 on Miami, you'd see that get grabbed right away. My count right now on Baltimore, even though I don't have a ton of early action, my count is about 3, almost 4 to 1 on Baltimore right now. So you kind of get the feeling that that's just a public side driving that. And Miami, in terms of public, they certainly seem like a team that the public would fade at this point.
Brent, the head risk manager down at DSI Sportsbook in Costa Rica. Lots of great stuff talking about here today. Even though we didn't have a lot of sharp action to report, I'm sure we'll have a lot more next week with line adjustments in college football and Week 1 of the NFL. But Brent, always a treat, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Always great to talk to you, Adam.
There you go. There's Brent, the head risk manager down at DSI Sportsbook in Costa Rica, finishing out this week here for us on Bang the Book Radio. Coming up on our Monday edition of Bang the Book Radio, I'll do the Bettors Box to start things off for the first half of the show. Then we'll have Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com. Big week in college football, going from Week 1 to Week 2 with all the adjustments and all that different type of stuff. So I guarantee you we'll have plenty to talk about in that Week 2 college football first look segment. Lots of great content for this weekend over at BangTheBook.com, covering all things college football for you, plus NASCAR and some other stuff. So make sure you take a look over at BangTheBook.com. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again on Monday.